We're on DAF Dalet Amud Aleph. Absolutely, thank you. Yesterday, we had a drasha. The Gemara had asked the question, how do you know that KIDDUSHIN can work through Kesef? And furthermore, the Gemara had asked, how do you know that when we're dealing with a minor or a Na'ara, the father gets the money and not the girl? And so the Gemara had said that there's two extra words in this pasuk. We're dealing with an Amma Ha'ivriya. When a girl is sold as a minor into servitude, so the law is that if the master, by the time she becomes a Nara, if he does not marry her, or if his son does not marry her, v'yatsa achinam, she goes away free. And then it says ein kasef. Those two extra words the Gemara had said are there to teach me that only this person, this master, does not receive money, but another master, meaning the father who has dominion over his daughter in a normal situation where he hasn't sold her into slavery, he does get the money for giving her over into marriage. That's what the Gemara had said, and that's how we know that, number one, money is a mechanism of marriage, and number two, that when the father marries off his daughter as a minor, he's the one who gets the money. The Gemara's question is, you're telling me that those two extra words, ein kasef, are there to teach me this principle, but the Gemara's question is, v'hai v'yatza chinam v'chulei lahachi huda'asa hamiboy le'lichidetanya. We need those extra two words for the following brisa. The Tanya, v'yatza achinam elu yemei bagrus, ein kasef elu yemei na'arus. The Torah, the brisa tells me that if I just had the two words v'yatza achinam, she goes away for free, that would imply that only when the girl is a bogeres, 12 and a half years old, that she goes free. But ein kasef teaches me that in addition to a bogeres going free, when the master has not married her, so too, even when she's 12, she goes free. If by the time she reaches the age of being a Nara, she goes free. So the question, therefore, is, how can you learn two things from just one pasuk, one phrase? Amar Ravina imkein lema kra ein kesef, my ein kesef la'adon zeh, vol yesh kesef la'adon acher, u'ma nihu av. So the Gemara gives a very troublesome drasha. It says the word ein, aleph yud nun, could have been spelled without the letter yud. Could have been spelled without the letter yud. The extra letter yud is there to indicate that there are two things that I'm supposed to be learning out from these words ein kasef. This is a very troublesome drasha because nowhere in the Torah do we ever find the word ein, just as the word ein, without the letter yud. So the Gemara is going to have to clarify this for us. Umimai de darshinan hachi. And how do we know that we can make such an exposition? De Tanya, because we have a similar brisa that says it that way. It says v'zera ein la. Now here the Torah is talking about a bas kohen who gets divorced or her husband dies, and the Torah says that if she has no zera, if she has no progeny, she can go back to her father's house and resume eating truma, that she wasn't allowed to do when she was married to the Israel. Now, ein li elazara, zera zara minayin. Now that only tells me that she's precluded from eating truma if she has progeny. What if she has no children, but she has grandchildren? In other words, let's say she had a son through the Israel, and the son at the age of 30 died, and he left over a grandson for her. So how do you know that too precludes her from eating truma, from going back to her father's house and eating truma? Is this Bubby now wants to go back to her father's house and eat truma? How do you know that even a grandchild will preclude her? Talmud Lomar zera ein la, ayin la. So it's interesting because it says, and it's not really clear from the language of the brisa where you see this from, but it says if she has no progeny. So the word ein implies that not only children, but examine her. And it seems that the way at least the Gemara is understanding this brisa is that through this extra letter yud, this word ein could be read as ayin, with an ayin, to examine her to make sure that she is completely clear of any future descendants, even grandchildren, and only then can she go back to her father's house. So you see that a grandchild precludes her from eating truma. Ve'ein li ela zera kasher, zera pasul minayin, tamul omar, zera ein la, ayin la. But then the Brisa goes further, and it says, but that only indicates that she's precluded from eating truma if she has a kosher grandchild. How do you know that even if she has a pasul grandchild, that too precludes her from eating truma? Now, what do we mean by a pasul grandchild? So Rashi says, let's say her son had an illicit a relationship with a woman that makes the child a mamzer. Let's say he had a child through a married woman, and the child is a mamzer. So there you could have made the argument that there's even less association between grandma and grandson, because the child really is, his whole lineage has been messed up, and therefore what does that have to do with me, Granny says? No, ein la, which means ayin la, you have to look completely into her family descendants, and any descendant, even a mamzer, will preclude her from going back to her father's house. So the Gemara says, how can you use the same words, ein la, to teach me both kosher progeny, kosher grandchildren, and non-kosher grandchildren? V'ha afikte l'zera zara. You already used it to tell me that if she has kosher grandchildren, those preclude her. How can you now say that it's even for non-kosher grandchildren? So the Gemara answers, zera zara lo itzterich kra de b'nei bonim harehin kebanim, ki itzterich kra l'zera pasol. So the answer is the Gemara, no. There's really only one drasha. The extra letter yud of ein la, teaches me that when if she has pasul grandchildren, those preclude her from eating truma. Why don't you need that to teach me about a regular grandchild? That I know without an extra pasuk, because b'nei banim harehin kebanim. It's a beautiful thought that grandchildren are like your own children. So therefore, even without a pasuk, I would know that if she leaves over a grandchild, even though she has no children anymore, those grandchildren who she had from the Yisrael preclude her from eating truma. The only thing that I need an extra pasuk for is even if the child is pasul and is therefore dissociated from his grandmother from a lineage standpoint, nevertheless, that child still precludes her from going back to her father's house. But now the Gemara says, all right, you've shown me an example of where a Tana uses the word ein, and he says you can make a drasha based on the extra letter yud. But the question is, v'tana gufe min alei de darish hachi. How does the Tana know that that's a legitimate drasha? So Amri ksiv me'ein bil'am u'me'ein yavami, Delo kasiv behu yud, v'hacha kasiv behu beyud, shma mina lidrashahu da'asa. So the Gemara answers very simply. It says you find the form of the word ein in verb form without the letter yud. We find that twice in the Torah, me'ein bil'am and me'ein yavami. The word lima'ein means to refuse. So me'ein bil'am, bil'am has refused, or me'ein yavami, mayavam has refused to do yibum. So you see that the word, when it's put in verb form, can be spelled without the yud. So ergo, even when it's in this form, which means not, or a negation of something, it could have been spelled without the yud, and therefore, because of that extra letter yud, you can make the drasha. As I mentioned, this is very troublesome, exactly how the Gemara does this, because everywhere in the Torah you find the word ein with the letter yud. But apparently Chazal had this tradition that you can, if you need to, use a letter yud in the word ein to make an extra drasha. But now the Gemara says, okay, fine. Let's go back. We're going to put that aside now. Let's go back now to two things that we learned yesterday. We had a pasuk to teach us that a father has rights to his daughter's kiddushin money when he marries her off as a minor. We also learned that a father has rights to his daughter's work product. When she works, the father gets her work product, and it was from a totally different pasuk. It was where it was by the law of rape and seduction, and motzi shemra was the law of motzi shemra. The Torah says that if a man's daughter is accused of not being a virgin at the time of marriage, the Torah says the father will approach the Beis Din and he will say, "Es biti nosati la'isha zeh li'isha." I have given my daughter over to this man as a wife. And the Gemara had said from that verbiage you can infer that the father has complete dominion, the very fact that he can give his daughter over as a wife, and so such that her husband has rights to her work product. That implies that the father himself has rights over his daughter's work product until she gets married. So the Gemara's question is, V'yitztrich lemichtav kiddusheha le'aviha, v'yitztrich lemichtav ma'aseh yodea le'aviha. The question is, why do you need two separate psukim? Why can't you infer one from the other? If the father has financial control of his daughter's kiddushin, why can't you infer from that he has financial control over his daughter's work product and vice versa? I'll tell you why. De'ikas of Rachmana kiddusheha le'aviha hava amina mishum delo tarcha behu avol ma'ase yadeha dekatarcha behu ema dida havu. Because if I would have only had a pasuk to tell me that the father has rights to his daughter's kiddushin money, maybe it's because she didn't exert herself physically to get that kiddushin money. But when she's working and she's producing and she's bringing home an income, maybe you would have argued that because she has exerted herself to earn that, that should belong to her. So therefore I need the pasuk to tell me that the father still gets her work product. V'i ashmi'inun ma'aseh yadeha deka mit zina minei avol kiddusheha de me'alma ka'asi la ema dida havu tzricha. And if I would have only had a pasuk to tell me that the father is entitled to his daughter's handiwork, to her work product, maybe it's because the father is feeding her. So in normal, like in a marriage, when we say that a husband has to feed his wife, and in exchange he's granted her work product. And maybe that's the same with a father, because the father has to feed his daughter, he's entitled to her work product as an exchange for that. But for kesef kiddushin, which is coming from a completely external source, maybe she would have a right to keep that herself. So that's why the Gemara says you need both psukim, because you cannot infer one from the other. Let's go back to that previous brisa. Gufa v'yatza chinam elu yemei bagrus ein kasef elu yemei naros. So the Gemara had said that you have these extra, according to this other brisa that we just saw today, the extra words ein kasef are there to teach me that not only does an Amma Ha'ivriya, a Jewish maid servant, a Jewish servant, not only does she go free upon reaching the age of Bagrus, but she even goes free upon reaching the age of Narus, that is 12 years old. So the Gemara's question is, V'lichtov Rachmana Narus v'lo boi Bagrus. So the question is, I don't understand. If you're telling me that by reaching the age of 12 she goes free, then that's the only thing that the Torah should write. Why do you need the extra verbiage? So the Gemara's answer is Amar Rabba Bazev Elimed al Zeh Mida Dahava Atoshav Esachir. So Rabba says that really you need both phrases, because essentially what Rabba is suggesting, if you only had one phrase, since that phrase does not actually say Bagrus explicitly or Narus explicitly, I would have assumed that it goes on the higher age. So I need the extra verbiage to tell you that not only does it refer to the higher age of Bagrus, but it refers even to the lower age of Nairus, and that's why I need the extra phrase. Since the phrases do not indicate Nairus or Bagrus, I need both phrases to tell me that don't think she only goes free at Bagrus, but she even goes free at Nairus. And an example of this is by the case of Toshav and Sachir, these two words that appear in a pasuk having to do with this totally different halacha. Detanya Toshav ze kanui kinyan olam, Sachir ze kanui kinyan shanim. So there's a brisa that states as follows. You know, the Torah says that if a Kohen owns an Eved Kanani, he owns a Gentile slave, the Gentile slave is permitted to eat the Kohen's truma. Why? Because that slave is the Kohen's financial possession. He owns the slave. But what if a Kohen owns a Hebrew slave, a Jewish slave? So that Jewish slave, if he's a Yisrael, does not have a right to eat truma. Why? Because the Kohen does not own the body of that slave. That guy's only indentured to the Kohen for a finite period of time. And what the Brisa therefore says is, there are two types of Hebrew slave. There's both the Toshav and the Sachir. The Toshav is a person who is a long-term Hebrew slave because he got his ear pierced. And basically the Torah says that if you're a Hebrew slave, you get to go free after 7 years. But if you refuse to go free because you want to continue working, you can get your ear pierced and you're a slave until Yovel. So the word Toshav refers to a slave who's a long-term slave because he got his ear pierced. And the Sachir is a regular Hebrew slave who only has to work for 7 years. And the Torah needs to tell you both. So Yomar Toshav V'lo Yomar Sachir. V'ani Omer Kanui Kinyan Ulam Eino Oichel Kanui Kinyan Shalom Lo Kol Shekei. So the question, of course, is, well, why don't you just write one and not the other? Just write the word toshav in the pasuk, and if that's referring to a long-term Hebrew slave that he does not eat truma, then surely a short-term Hebrew slave will not eat truma, right? Doesn't that logic follow? So the Gemara says, "Ilu kain hayisi omer toshav ze kanui kinyan shanim avol kanui kinyan olam ochel ba sachir v'li made al toshav sha'af al pisha kanui kinyan olam eino ochel." So the Brisa answers, and it says, no, you have to write both words, toshav and sachir, because these words do not definitively imply how long the fellow is working for, how long he's indentured for. If I would have only had the word toshav, I might have thought that it refers to a short-term Hebrew slave, but a long-term Hebrew slave does eat truma. So therefore the Torah has to write both the words toshav and sachir to tell me that the Torah is addressing both kinds of Hebrew slave, both the short-term slave and the long-term slave, to tell you that both of them do not eat truma. In a similar vein, the Gemara is suggesting that's why you had to write both the phrase v'yatza achinam and ein kasef, because one of them refers to a bogeres who leaves her servitude, and the other one refers to a naira, that even at a younger age she leaves her servitude. So Amar le Abaye midami. So Abaye challenges this analogy, and he says, I'm not happy with the analogy that you made between our case of Amma Ha'ivriya, a Jewish girl leaving at the age of 12, and the case of a Hebrew slave not eating truma. He says, because Hasam tre gufininhu dechinami kasav rachmana toshav nirtza lo yalchal v'hadar kasav idach hava sachir milsa da'asya bekal v'chomer milsa da'asya bekal v'chomer tarach v'kasav lakra elahacha chad gufahi ki nafkala b'nairus b'bagrus my baya gabe. So I'm going to paraphrase this question, but it's a very it's a very subtle and sophisticated question. What Abaye is essentially asking is, you're comparing apples and oranges. You know, the whole reason why you said by the case of the Eved Ivri that the Torah has to use both phrases, the toshav and the sachir, is because, you know, these words toshav and sachir don't automatically imply long-term or short-term. So you have to write both phrases to make sure that you understand that both the long-term and the short-term slave are included, right? Because if you only had one phrase, I might think it's referring to the lesser chiddush and tell me only that the short-term slave doesn't eat truma, but the long-term slave does. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, says Abaye. Let's say the Torah would have defined the word toshav as being nirtza, as being a fellow who got his ear pierced. Would it be so terrible for the Torah also to write the word sachir to include a short-term slave? No, because many times the Torah says that even the Torah writes things explicitly, even if you could have inferred it from a kal v'chomer. The Torah does that sometimes, so it's not such an outlandish thing for the Torah to write something that I would have inferred through logic anyway. But here, that's not the case. You're essentially telling me the Torah has to write two phrases, because if it only have written one phrase, I would have assumed that it's referring to a bogeres and not a naira. So you have to write two phrases, one for a bogeres and one for a naira. But the problem is that the bogeres is a fiction. In other words, in the case of the Hebrew slave not eating the Kohen's truma, it's true. Both the short-term slave and the long-term slave, who are two completely different categories of people, do not eat truma. But if you're telling me that you need both phrases by over here to tell me that both a nara and a bogeres go free from servitude, a bogeres never leaves servitude. Only a nara leaves servitude. By the time she's already at the age of a bogeres, she'd already left at the age of a nara. So you're creating a fiction that doesn't exist according to halacha. The Torah what the Torah should have done is it should have defined in the pasuk that a naira goes free, in other words, once she reaches the age of 12, and not have to use an ambiguous phrase to address a situation which doesn't even exist in halacha, of a bogeres going free. Because a bogeres never goes, because emancipation never occurs at the age of bagrus. If emancipation always occurs at the time of nairus, which is at the age of 12, then how can the Torah add and tell me information that's false that a bogeres goes free? A bogeres never goes free. She only goes free as a naira. She never goes free as a bogeres. So the question that the Gemara is asking is, it's one thing for the Torah theoretically to give me information that is factual, but that it didn't need to write because I would have inferred it through logic. But it's another thing for the Gemara to give me information that not only could I infer from logic, but that is false. It's not that both a naira and a bogeres go free. Only a naira goes free. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara's answer is, so Ella Amar Abaye lo nisracha Ella leveger or levager da'ailanis. So Abaye says, here's the real answer. You know why the Torah needs to write both phrases over here? Because there are times when a girl goes free, as a bogeres. You know what? You know when the girl goes free as a bogeres? When she was an ailanis. You see, normally a girl starts to display signs of puberty at the age of 12. And that's what we define as a na'ara. At the age of 12 and a half, 6 months after she has displayed signs of puberty, she becomes what's called the bogeres. But that's only true if her physiology is working correctly. What if she has a condition called the ailanis, which causes her never to display signs of puberty? So the halacha is that she's not considered to be a bogeres until she reaches the age of 20. On her 20th birthday, she's defined as a bogeres, despite the fact that she has not displayed signs of puberty. And the halacha is that if she was an Amma Ha'ivriya, she would go free. So that's how I know. That's why I need the extra phrase. It's not that there's no such scenario as a bogeres ever going free because of her bagrus. There is. And that's why I need the second phrase. So one phrase is to tell me that a girl goes free as a na'ara, and the other phrase is to tell me that a girl goes free as a bogeres when what? When she was an ailanis, and therefore she could not be emancipated as a na'ara. You only get emancipated as a na'ara if you begin displaying signs of puberty. If you don't begin displaying signs of puberty because you're an ailanis, so then you have to wait until the age of 20, and then you go free as a bogeres. So salka daita chamina benaras tepuk bagros lo tepuk kamash malan. Because I might have thought that the only way a girl goes free is through her pubescence as an ira. But if she never achieves pubescence because she's an ailanis, then maybe she would never go free. And that's what the Torah has to tell me, that no, even as an ailanis who never achieves pubescence, she still goes free by reaching the age of bogeres, which is the age of 20. So maskefla marbar avashi v'lav kal v'chomerhu. So Marbar Avashi says, why do you need the Torah to explicate that, to tell me that from a phrase in a pasuk that if she reaches the age of bagrus without pubescence, she gets to go free? It's a kal v'chomer. Your Torah doesn't need to write it. Umas simonim she'ein motziin mirishus av motziin mirishus adon bagrus shemotzia mirishus av enodin shemotzia mirishus adon. Here's the kal v'chomer. Pubescence does not cause her to leave her father's dominion, because a father has control over his daughter even after she reaches the age of 12 until the age of 12 and a half. A father still has a right to marry off his daughter and has rights of maaseh yadeha and so forth. So you see that pubescence is not the basis for a girl to have independence from her father, and yet reaching the age of bagrus does make her independent of her father. So surely, in a situation where pubescence does gain her independence, which is in the case of servitude, surely bagrus does. So Marbar Avashi's question is, still, why did the Torah need to write it? So Ella Omar Marbar Avashi lo nitzrecha ela leikar zvina da ailanis. Salka daita chamina da asya simone nairus havi zvina, da lo asya simone nairus lo havi zvina zvina, kamash milan v'yatza chinam v'chulei ein kasem. So Marbar Avashi says it's like this. I might have thought that not that a girl does not go free when she reaches the age of bagrus, but I might have thought just the opposite. That if a girl reaches the age of 12 and does not display signs of pubescence because she's an ailanis, I might have thought that that completely nullifies the sale from its very inception. That a sale of a girl who is not capable of pubescence cannot be sold as an Amma Ha'ivriya, and it voids the entire sale from the very beginning. And that's why I need the extra phrase of Ein Kasef, to tell me that no, that despite the fact that she never reaches pubescence, she never becomes a Naira in that sense, nevertheless, the sale of this girl is a sale, and I learned that out from the words Ein Kasef, that even though she's an islandess, the sale was a valid sale. And yes, it's true that she goes free, but you don't need the pasuk to tell me that she goes free when she becomes a bogeres at 20, because that's something that we derive from a kal v'chomer. So now the Gemara says, "Ulamar baravashi domer b'lav kal v'chomer hu harminan milsa de asya b'kal v'chomer ta'arach b'kasav l'kra." But let's go back to Mar baravashi's premise. His whole question was, why does the Torah have to write something that I can already derive from a kal v'chomer? But didn't we just get through saying that sometimes the Torah will write things that I can infer from logic, but the Torah will write them anyway? So what's the big deal? If the Torah were to tell me that a girl goes free through Bagrus, and I could have derived that through logic from a Kal V'chomer anyway, what's wrong if the Torah would write that explicitly with an extra phrase? The Gemara answers, Hani mili heicha deleka l'shinuye, aval heicha dika l'shinuye mishaninan. The answer is very simply, the Gemara says, it's true. When you get stuck, when you get your back stuck against the wall and you have no other way of explaining why the Torah should add additional phraseology, so then taka, you have to resort to the fact that sometimes the Torah will write things even though that information could have been inferred from logic. However, when you have a way of explaining why the Torah adds a phrase without relying on that answer, then you should try and find that answer. So this is therefore the superior answer. Mar Baravashi acknowledges that if I had no other reason to write Ein Kasef, I would have resorted to the fact that even though I would have known from logic that a girl goes free as a bogeres, the Torah writes it anyway. But Mar Baravashi says, but I have another way of explaining the words Ein Kasef, that it means that you might have thought that a girl who is an islandess nullifies the sale once it's revealed that she's an islandess at the age of 12. So Kamash Malan, that it doesn't, that we don't nullify the sale completely. She still is a valid Amma Ha'ivriya, and she remains in servitude until she reaches the age of Bagrus.
That rule, where does he get that? I mean, where does he get that idea that if you're up against the wall, that's your last resort argument? I mean, you could say that. I mean, I understand his logic, but I understand what he's saying, but why does he say that?
So our rabbis had a tradition that any time that you find extra phraseology in the Torah that the Torah didn't need to tell you because it could have been inferred from logic, there was a tradition that many times the Torah will take the time to write it, even though a kal v'chomer could have been employed instead. So
he's getting that from a tradition of
that's based on an oral tradition. And Barbara Avashi says, yes, when I'm stuck, I'll rely on that. But when I have a very valid law that I would not infer from logic, that I can point to as to why the Torah wrote that extra phrase, that's what I'm going to use it for. So now the Gemara says, okay, now this, by the way, I acknowledge this was a very sophisticated line of back and forth, so I appreciate the silence in the room. So now the Gemara says, V'tana maisi la mehacha. So up until now, what we did from yesterday is we were bringing from a brisa that states that how do I know that kesef works as a mechanism of kiddushin? From the fact that a father can sell his daughter into servitude, and only when she leaves servitude is there ein kasef, is there no money. But there is money when she's not sold into servitude, but rather is being married off by her father. So that in itself teaches me that, number one, the mechanism of kesef is a mechanism of marriage. And number two, it tells me that when a father is marrying off his minor daughter, he's the one who gets the money. But we have another brisa that derives it from a totally different source, which we learned 2 days ago when we began Maseches Kiddushin. Detanya ki yikach ish isha uva'ala v'haya im lo simtzachen be'enav ki matzah ba ervas davar, etc. When a man shall marry a woman, have intimacy with her, and if he discovers that he doesn't, there's something unsightly about her, he has the option of divorce. But the Torah uses the words ki yikach, when a man shall take. that verb take implies cash. Ein kicha ela b'kesef v'chein homer. How do we know this? Because it says in the pasuk by Avraham purchasing the Maras HaMachpelah from Ephron, it says nosati kesef hasadeh kach mimen. Avraham says, I've given the cash, take it from me, and that will cause the exchange. V'halo dinhu. So the Gemara's question now is, why do you need a pasuk to tell me something that I could have derived from a kal v'chomer? Uma ama ha'ivriya she'ena niknes b'via niknes b'kesef, zusha niknes b'via eno din shetikane b'kesef. Look at an ama ha'ivriya. She cannot. The only method of acquiring her to her master is through cash. She cannot be acquired through bia, through physical intimacy. If a person wants to acquire a maid servant, the only method of acquiring her as your servant is through paying cash. You cannot use the method of bia. So therefore, surely in a situation where bia, as we'll see shortly, this very pasuk also teaches me that intimacy also is a method of marriage. So therefore, the question is like this. If intimacy works to create a marriage, so then surely use the kal v'chomer from Amma ha'ivriya that kesef works, because Amma ha'ivriya, the only method that works for her is kesef. So surely when bia works, so also kesef should work. So the Gemara's answer is no. Yavama tochiach sheniknes b'via ve'ena niknes b'kesef. I'll show you an example where bia is the only mechanism that works, which is by a yavama, where the Torah only allows the marriage between a yavama and a yavam to take place through bia, and kesef does not work. So therefore, just because bia works does not indicate that automatically kesef should work. But wait a minute, that's not a good argument, because ma'ala yavama shekain a niknes b'shtar, tomer bezusha niknes b'shtar. But one second, I can understand if the only mechanism of marriage is through bia, that would be a good argument. But over here, a woman can be acquired in three ways: kesef, shtar, and bia. Now we already know that she can be acquired through bia and shtar, as we'll indicate from Sukkim later on. But if she can be acquired through both bia and shtar, shouldn't you use the kal v'chomer from Amma ha'ivriya that she can be acquired through kesef as well? And you can't bring me the argument of a yavama, because the yavama can only be acquired one way, not two ways like a regular woman. So the Gemara answers, so this is still really part of the question. Talmud Omer ki yikach ish halama likra ha'asyala. So therefore, why do you need a pasuk of ki yikach ish isha to tell me that you can use kesef? We already derive it from a kal v'chomer. So Amar Ravashi mishum de'ika lameimar me'ikra dedina pircha. The answer is, says Ravashi, because what was your whole kal v'chomer that you were trying to make was from Amma ha'ivriya. That if kesef works for her, then surely it should work for a woman for whom bia and shtar work also. So mehecha kamaisis lame Amma ha'ivriya malo Amma ha'ivriya shekein yotza bekesef tomar bezu sheina yotza bekesef. But that in itself is the flaw in your argument, because how does an Amma ha'ivriya acquire her freedom? She acquires her freedom from servitude through kesef also. So maybe that's the reason why over there kesef works to make her indentured in the first place. A married woman, can she acquire her freedom from the marriage through kesef? No. There may be women who would want to. If they had the opportunity to write a check to get out of the marriage, they'd be happy to do so. But it doesn't work that way. The only way that they can get divorced is through a get, right? So therefore, or through the death of the husband. So therefore, just because you see that kesef works to indenture an Amma ha'ivriya does not prove that you can use kesef to indenture a woman to marriage, because just because kesef works there, she also gains independence through kesef, which is not the case by marriage. Now, so now the Gemara says, so Tamalomar ki yikachish, and that's why you need ki yikachish to tell me that kesef works even for marriage. You can't use a kal v'chomer. V'itzrach lemichtav v'yatzechinam v'itzrach lemichtav ki yikachish. And now the Gemara says, okay, we have two psukim now that we've used to tell me that kesef is a mechanism of marriage. One is from ki yikach ish isha, from the Avraham and Ephron, and the other one is from v'yatzechinam ein kasef. So we said from the actual letter yud and the word ein, that teaches me that that kesef is going to go in a case of marriage to, even though the Adam doesn't get kesef, but the father will get kesef when he marries off his daughter. So why do you need both psukim? I'll tell you why. Di kasav rachmana ki yikach hava amina kiddushin diyav labal didahavu. So kasav rachmana v'yatzachina. Because if I would have only had the pasuk of Avraham and Ephron of ki yikach, I would have thought that any time that there's marriage, the female gets the money. So therefore, I need the pasuk of Ein Kasef to tell me that when the daughter is a minor, the father gets the money. V'i Kasef Rachmana v'yatzachinam hava mina heicha diyahava ihi l'didei v'kidashto ha'v'kiddushay so Kasef Rachmana kiyika v'lo kisikach. And if I would have only had the pasuk extra verbiage of v'yatzachinam Ein Kasef, what does Ein Kasef mean? That there's no money that's given to the master, but there is money that's given to another party in the case of marriage. But that pasuk doesn't indicate who's giving the money and who's getting the money. So I might have thought if I only had that pasuk that it's a bilateral process. Either the man can present the money to the girl or the girl's father, or the girl can present money to the man. And either way, there's a marriage. So that's why I need the pasuk of ki yichach to tell me that it's unilateral, that it's only that the husband presents the money to the female and not vice versa. So that's why I need both psukim. So now we go on to the next category, which is bia. How do you know that a man can marry a woman through bia? Because it says uva'ala, melamed sheniknes bebia. This part, the very same pasuk that we quoted before, ki yikach ish isha uva'ala, that when a man will take a woman and have intimacy with her, so you see that intimacy is a method of marriage. V'halo dinhu uma yavama she'ein niknes bekesef niknes bevia zusha niknes bekesef eno din she'niknes bevia. But the Gemara says, why do you need a pasuk? Isn't it a kal v'chomer? Look at a yavama. Her method of marriage is exclusively through bia. So surely a woman who could also be married through kesef should also be able to be married through bia, just like a yavama. But the Gemara says no. Ama ha'ivriya tochiach sheniknes bekesef ve'niknes bebia. We do the exact opposite mental exercise. That an ama ha'ivriya will demonstrate that sometimes kesef is the only mechanism that works because she can only be acquired through kesef. It cannot be acquired through bia. So therefore, I've shown you that you can't make such a kal v'chomer. But the Gemara says no. That's not a valid argument because mala ama ha'ivriya she'en kinyana l'shum ishus tamar bezusha kinyana l'shum ishus. So, but wait a minute. You can't bring me a proof from an Amma Ha'ivriya that sometimes only Kesef works. The reason why only Kesef works by an Amma Ha'ivriya is because you're not acquiring her for marriage. But in a situation where you're acquiring a woman for marriage, if Kesef works, then surely physical intimacy should work because that's the objective of marriage. So why do you need a pasuk? So therefore the question is, Tamalomer uva'ala v'lama likraha asyala. So why do you need a pasuk uva'ala? If you've already shown me that a woman can be married through kesef, and we know that by yibum, bia is a valid mechanism, so then surely for marriage, surely it should be a valid mechanism over here in a regular marriage as well. So Amar Ravashi mishum de'ikal amemar me'ikra dedina pircha. Explains Ravashi again, because the whole basis of your logical argument is flawed. Mehecha kamais islami yavama. You're trying to prove from the law of yavama that just like a yavama, her marriage can be affected through bia, so too a regular marriage can be affected through bia. No, mali yavama shekain zukuka v'yomedes tomer bezu shein zukuka v'yomedes tamulomar uva Allah. He says the basic difference is this: a yavama. Maybe you could argue that the whole reason why a yavama's marriage can be affected through bia is because there's already a pre-existent connection between the yavam and the yavama. It's what we call zika. Because when her husband dies, the Torah automatically assigns a connection between the decedent's brother and the widow. So that's maybe the reason why bia, which is an act of physical intimacy, works. But how do you know that between two complete strangers who have never been connected before at all, that bia should be a valid method of connecting the two together to create a marriage? Therefore, you can't bring a kal v'chomer from yavama because yavama has that prior connection. Here, there is no prior connection, and that's why you need a pasuk to tell me that bia is a valid method of marriage. Have a wonderful day.